We're here today to talk about an issue that has been around for a while, and we want to revisit it for a multitude of reasons on the merits, on government policy, on the public's well-being, and the safety of the people that we represent. I'm joined by a number of my colleagues here today, and I'll make it simple. No driver's licenses for illegal immigrants. We didn't believe in it then. We don't believe in it now. It was wrong-headed policy at the time. It condones illegal behavior. It subverts the work of trusted federal agencies in terms of national security, which transcends into the state of New York, and the security of the people of the state of New York. So we do have a number of our colleagues who are going to speak to this, but I do want to give a little background before I start by recognizing Senator Ortt. Yesterday, a number of us had the opportunity to meet with not only Assembly Minority Leader Will Barkley and a number of his conference, but also with Congressman Tom Reed and representatives from CPB and ICE and Homeland Security. And he had brought these officials down, and it was fascinating to listen to these folks. It was enlightening, it was important, it was disconcerting in particular, because these are the people on the front lines who actually do the work. I was struck by a number of things, and I think my colleagues could comment on this, and struck in a good way. I was in awe of their level of professionalism, their expertise, their apolitical approach to their jobs. I was struck by how quickly and how finely they could hone in on what are the real issues. These folks truly believe that the law that was enacted by the state of New York makes New York unique in a bad way. We're the only state that has adopted any kind of policy like this. We are an aberration. And again, not in a good way. They talked about how all their personnel, their well-being, and their safety is at risk. This is not me. This is not us saying this. These are the pros that are out there every single day. And when you watch them and you listen to them, it's real, the way they speak about these issues. They also were very clear about what is potentially going to happen to the public. They don't want anything bad to happen, but one of the people there said absolutely that people are going to get hurt. They also stressed that the DMV database is the absolute start point of everything. Without that, they have a hand tied behind their back. They can't do their jobs properly. They put themselves at risk. They put the public at risk. And again, these are the pros in the field saying that's where it starts. So we find ourselves in a situation again, a law that was passed last year, and with our press release today, we sent out some footage from the debate and from the video and statements before, during, and after. The whole premise of this law was nothing to do with the driving public. It was nothing to do with public safety. It had nothing to do with insurance. The prime sponsor of the bill said this is to prevent immigration enforcement. I repeat, to prevent immigration enforcement, in direct contravention of federal law. Our colleagues got up and spoke and said there will be problems and there will be ramifications, and now we're seeing what those ramifications are. So I'm going to highlight one other thing that was done last year as part of an array of awful public policy to help, again, avoid immigration enforcement and potential deportation. The Democrats, one-party rule, the governor, the Senate Democrats, the Assembly Democrats moved misdemeanor charges from 365 days a year to 364 days a year with the sole purpose of making sure, because it was not a full 1 year, that people would not be subject to federal deportation. So we're not just talking about this. We're talking about a philosophy and a mentality that puts our constituents at risk. Having said that, the first person I want to recognize is Senator Rob Ortt, who is extraordinarily articulate on these issues. Ask him to speak about his thoughts reflecting on last year as well. Senator Ortt.
Thank you, Leader. I want to thank Senator Flanagan and my colleagues who are here today. And I want to thank, even though he's not here today, I want to thank Congressman Reed and the professionals from CPB and DHS and ICE who were here yesterday to give us what was an operational brief. I think that's important. They were not here to advocate or not advocate for a specific policy. And on several questions and occasions, they made that very clear. They were here to provide us a brief of how this law has impacted their operational capabilities, which include, by the way, or the net result is keeping New Yorkers safe. We are a border state. I represent a district that has three international crossings. There was an issue, a situation they brought up that actually occurred at one of my crossings in my district where they were able to use the DMV database to apprehend someone who had committed murder. And if you talk to any law enforcement professional, federal, state, or local, access to the DMV database, access to people's license plates is very often a key in apprehending people who have committed crimes, who are fugitives from justice, and keeping us safe. And to put it bluntly, and it was said in that room, and I think it's very well put, this law reflects a pre-9/11 thought process and a post-9/11 world. Because if you think about how we got here, Governor Pataki, did away with driver's licenses and identifications for those who were here illegally after 9/11. Because what we knew was most of those hijackers had identifications, many of them fraudulently obtained, that they used to take classes, that they used to board planes, that they used to kill 3,000 Americans. That's a fact. That's not my opinion. That's not a political statement. That is a hard and true fact that the state of New York should never forget. Home to 9/11. But I mean, I can tell you, with this law, we have forgotten it. Because during the debate that I had with the sponsor of the bill, his rebuttal to that fact was that because they had IDs, we were able to quickly identify them. Because they had IDs, we were able to quickly figure out who it was that flew those planes into those buildings, that flew those planes into the Pentagon. Thank God we had the identification process. I wanted that to settle in for a second, to sink into people's minds, that we're no longer trying to prevent the act of terrorism. We're just content with having identification so we can find out who committed the act in the first place. The point of the governor's executive order then, and the reason we oppose this law now, one of the reasons, is to prevent acts like 9/11. I don't want to sit there and tell people, don't worry, after someone does something, we'll be able to identify them real quick. I want to prevent those things from happening. The people at the border, the people we heard from yesterday who work in ICE, who work in CBP, they work and they get up every day and they take an oath and they put on that uniform to prevent things like that from happening, not to identify it after the fact. And what we've done is we've made it more difficult for them to do their job, to enforce federal law. Federal law that has existed through Democratic administrations and through Republican administrations. But now we live in a time where we have a state government here that is doing everything they can to undermine federal law. Keep in mind, many of the folks who voted for this bill, including the sponsor, have publicly called for the abolition of ICE. They don't want ICE to exist. They don't want us to be able to enforce our immigration laws and policies. The sponsor of the bill, when I asked him, do you think that people who are here illegally have committed a crime? He said no. I asked him to repeat that question. He said no. So we have a difference, clearly, I guess philosophically, but I would say we have a different interpretation of the facts. Because I have no doubt that people who have violated our immigration laws have committed a crime. And many of them who get deported have committed second and third crimes when they're actually apprehended and then processed for deportation. So this bill not only, I believe, jeopardizes our security, but as we just saw with the federal government, by denying access to the DMV database for our federal authorities, by making it harder for them to do their job, by making it harder for them to assess potential risks, they have now responded by restricting access to, I think at one point it was said, within 5 years, it could be up to 800,000 New Yorkers that'll be impacted by the denial of the access to the global traveler programs, Nexus, TSA PreCheck, all those kinds of things. And I can tell you again, as someone who represents a border district, the impact on commerce and on people's daily lives That is significant. 800,000 New Yorkers impacted, not as a part of a political vendetta. If anything, the vendetta was this law, because this law went further than any other state that has driver's licenses for illegal immigrants. This law specifically lined out Customs and Border Protection and ICE as agencies not to have access to that information. California didn't do that. Oregon didn't do that. None of the other states that have this kind of law. So when people say, oh, 12 other states have this and only New York is being punished, that's because only New York was either dumb enough or brazen enough to go even further and specifically say, we don't want CBP and ICE to have this information because we don't want them to do their job. Senator Sepulveda said our only issue is with federal law enforcement. He openly said that. This bill went further. It targeted federal authorities from doing their job, which they have sworn an oath to uphold and do, and which we did too, by the way. And the people who voted for this forgot that oath and didn't follow through that oath when they voted for this bill. Plain and simple. And so, for many of those reasons, today, that's what we're dealing with today, the impact of this legislation. When you pass policies like this, there are repercussions. And we are seeing those repercussions that regular New Yorkers, people I represent, my local economy, now will suffer the consequences or the impacts of that because of this flawed, politically motivated, bad policy. And so we're calling for its repeal. Absolutely, we're certainly calling for changes regarding the sharing of the information so these programs can be restored. But the bottom line is this was a bad bill then, it's a bad bill now, and I want to thank Leader Flanagan for holding this press conference and my colleagues for standing up here today in support of repealing this bill.
Thank you, Senator Roth. I want to recognize Senator Akshar, whose experience in law enforcement alone qualifies him to be speaking. Thank you.
Leader, thank you, and I too want to thank all of our colleagues for being here today. I think we're seeing a terrible trend with this new one-party rule and our friends across the aisle. They continue to advance bad pieces of policy without any real knowledge of how that policy is going to affect people. And now when you have people that came here yesterday and explained operationally how these policies affect them, our friends across the aisle truly need to wake up. I'm proud to be standing with my colleagues today because once again, we are putting law-abiding citizens above those who break the law. And I want to say it again because this is a common theme of our friends across the aisle where they put criminals first above law-abiding New Yorkers. So today we're standing with law-abiding New Yorkers and not criminals. From my own experiences in law enforcement, the sharing of information is the very lifeblood of law enforcement. And the green light law, as you heard from Senator Ortt, has taken that away. So if we have the technology, if we have the ability to work together to share information to keep people safe, why in God's name are we not doing that? Why is that not our number one priority? And I, for one, am getting a little tired of people in this city blaming the federal government for our woes. If anybody is looking to cast blame and wondering why we are in the position we are, they need to do a little self-reflecting. They need to look no further than the mirror. So today I'm really urging my Democratic colleagues to remember that doing what's right may not always be what's popular. And what's popular may not always be what's right. But today they're one and the same thing. And I voted against a terrible, misguided policy last year. And I'll be joining my colleagues this year in voting for the amendment to repeal this particular piece of law because we owe it. We owe it to everyday, hardworking, law-abiding New Yorkers. You know what? We all make mistakes. The Democrats last year made a terrible mistake by way of this policy, and they should vote with us today on the amendment. Leader, thank you.
Thank you. Another of our colleagues is a new member, but steeped in experience as a small business owner. And quite frankly, it's refreshing to see a new face. Senator Borrello has invigorated our conference with new ideas, and he can speak very plainly, very clearly to the ramifications in his area. Senator Borrello.
Thank you very much, Leader. Thank you all. I think one of the most resounding things yesterday that I heard from the members of Customs and Border Protection was that everything that they do, every investigation starts with a DMV check. And they have been neutered for political reasons from doing that. They talked a lot about officer safety, the safety of those folks that are sworn to protect the United States and the people of New York from terrorism, from human trafficking, from organized crime, drug trafficking, and they are not allowed to access this database. It actually is so egregious that it was palatable, the frustration that these folks that are every day putting their lives on the line for the people of this country and the people of this state are feeling. But there's also something unique in our area, in Western New York especially. We have the border with Canada, but a big part of that border, in my district especially, is nearly 75 miles of unsecured shoreline along Lake Erie. That border, and in fact where I live, the community that I live in Sunset Bay along Lake Erie, sees Customs and Border Protection vehicles and surveillance on an almost daily basis, particularly in the summertime. And why are they there? Because they know what's happening. As they said, very bad people doing very bad things are crossing that border. And I see it myself. You can hear in the middle of the night boats coming across the lake in the middle of the night. These are people that are doing very bad things that Customs and Border Patrol needs data for. What's also restricted is the hull information on boats. They no longer can access that to find out who owns this boat, where is it coming from, do the IDs match the boat and everybody on board. We are hamstringing the ability to protect our nation, to protect the citizens of this state for a political purpose. So you have to ask yourself, why? Why did New York's law go beyond every other state that has granted driver's licenses to illegal immigrants? It's pretty simple. Because there's some foolhardy contest to prove that we're the most progressive state in the nation, a meaningless designation. And they're willing to put the lives of our law enforcement officials, the lives of our citizens, and the safety and security of our nation all aside to prove that they're the most progressive. This law was flawed to begin with. But to make some kind of a ridiculous statement that we have to go a step beyond, no matter how ridiculous, is so egregious. And that's what happened here. It's the same thing with bail reform. This is not about bail. It's about proving that they're the most progressive. That is a dangerous contest for this state to win, and we are seeing the results of it. We are seeing the laws of New York State that have been cast aside to protect criminals. And that's what we're seeing now. And this law is another part of that. And our federal government, who's trying to protect our nation and our state, is being hamstrung. It is shameful. And as a local elected official, former local elected official, and as a current business owner, how much more can we take? As tax-paying, law-abiding citizens of the state, how much more can we take when their job is to listen to small, radical groups of people that they feel should drive policy in New York State? We are quickly spiraling down because of things like this, and it has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Borrello. One of the things that I was struck by yesterday, and I was thinking of Senator Akshar in particular, when you have to listen to federal enforcement agents say that every other law enforcement entity, local, regional, statewide, they actually were forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That should be anathema to what we stand for as a society. I believe it's and I remember listening to Senator Funke explain his vote last year. In my opinion, asking anyone who's involved in law enforcement to sign a non-disclosure, ask them to violate their oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of New York. And I think when we go home, you explain that to the average person, they're like, well, I'm sorry. So the New York City Police Department or the Buffalo Police Department or the Suffolk County Police Department, they actually had to sign a document saying, oh no, we'll share with everyone. No, we can't do this. We're now prohibited by law to do this. That's counter to what we should be doing and the things that we should be advocating. Another thing that I do want to point out, and each of my colleagues spoke to this, but Senator Borrello in particular. You know, my community, I have miles of shoreline as well. Not nearly as much as Senator Borrello. Patty Ritchie and a number of our colleagues have extensive shoreline properties. I learned a good lesson yesterday just about the commerce between upstate New York and Canada. Just just the truck traffic alone. Truck traffic alone, which is now going to be hamstrung, to go back to that word. And what they seem to have forgotten, the ramifications, again, these choices have consequences. These folks, even though you may be a quote-unquote trusted traveler, they are still checked out real time, live, and that is no longer an available option. We are going to continue to distinguish ourselves by what we believe in and how we advocate on behalf of our constituents. And it's a pattern of lawlessness, recklessness, in our opinion, and with far more of a focus on criminals as opposed to victims. When I look at a 31-year professional stand up and say, we're not going after your run-of-the-mill criminal. We're going after MS-13. We're going after gang members. We're going after rapists. We're going after murderers. We're going after people who exploit children. This is a bad law. Today, to be clear, we're offering an amendment to repeal this law. It's very focused, it's very narrow, and it's very important. And we keep doing these types of things because the Democrats are really undermining public safety. And we look forward to that vote on the floor today and whatever debate and exchange may occur, because all of our colleagues are very passionate about this, and Lord knows we are ready.